It's a term defined in the 70s, rape culture. But how has the term defined our nation's outlook of sexual violence against women? And how are women in our community working to change the societal view of rape culture? I'm Rana Kamal. This is Our Issues, Twin Cities.
We have a lot of jewelry made from recycled bullet casings. So our recycled bullet casing line is made by a group of women in Ethiopia. There's about 160 women, and they all have HIV, AIDS, or fistula.
Joy McBrien is the founder of Fair Anita.
Fair Anita is a social enterprise. We're all about investing in the power of women. We're selling fair trade jewelry that these women are creating. So we primarily work with women who have a history of sexual or domestic violence.
It was Joy's story, her story of surviving rape, that inspired her to help and empower other victims of sexual violence.
As a senior in high school, I was raped for the first time. It was by a man that I worked with, and it was on his birthday. And following that, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't talk to anyone about it for about 2 years.
Why didn't you tell anyone right off the bat?
I didn't identify it as rape right away, and I think that's an issue that a lot of women struggle with. I knew I felt violated. I knew, I was like overwhelmed with all these emotions, but I didn't like identify it as that. And I think part of that was just like lack of people talking about it. Like I didn't really understand it to be a thing. So it wasn't actually until a seminar at the University of Minnesota as a freshman where they like straight up defined rape for me that I understood that that's what it was. And so it took a long time.
After overcoming her sexual assault, she traveled to Peru with intentions to start an organization to work with women to overcome sexual violence, but ultimately went a different direction. Instead, she saw economic opportunity to help battered women.
While I was meeting with these women and hearing their stories, I just heard over and over again, well, like that's nice, but what I really need right now is a job. Like if I had a job, I could potentially leave an abusive partner. I'm seen as having more worth in my own home, so abuse levels go down. I can take care of my family and children. And so after hearing that enough times, I realized, okay, so how do we create jobs?
Named after a woman she had met in Chimbote, Peru, today Fair Anita works with 8,000 women in 16 countries.
What has Fair Anita done for all these women around the world who live in refugee camps, who come from poverty, who've experienced sexual violence?
Fair Anita, we provide steady jobs to women. We pay at least 3 times the minimum wage in the different countries. Most of our groups, we also work with them to provide health care, to provide education opportunities, different things like that. And so this steady form of income has allowed women, I think, a chance to feel powerful again, and capable and human.
All of us should be able to live free from sexual violence.
Jeanne is the executive director of MNCASA, who work with sexually assaulted women from all over Minnesota to give back their voice and end rape culture.
We work on that policy level. We work with the Capitol, our legislators to change laws and work with others within systems to change their practices. And we do a lot of training, quite a bit of training to help improve our practices.
Rape culture, a terminology of the 70s, defined sexual violence being normalized while victims are blamed for their own assaults.
How has rape culture affected women who have been victims of sexual violence?
Their experience is minimized, and it's minimized by others, and sometimes it's even minimized by themselves because they're a part of that culture too, and they've taken on those messages too. And those messages can lead to self-blame or confusion, and then also, by others, that they're not believed or they're not taken seriously. And then the rape culture also affects those who might perpetrate sexual violence in the way that it minimizes or normalizes that behavior. And we've really seen that, unfortunately, exacerbated some in recent months as well. And we see that it's really minimized and trivialized in many different forums.
Today, more and more women are challenging rape culture by coming forward to share their experience and expose their perpetrator.
Do you believe that women are becoming more comfortable coming forward and sharing their experience with sexual violence?
I don't think it's ever comfortable for women to share their stories. Now I've talked about my different experiences with rape. I don't know, probably over 1,000 times. I talk about it a lot because I think it's necessary. When one woman is sharing her story, we can see the tremendous impact that it has on so many others. And so I think it's just a really tremendous thing to feel like you're part of a solution. And I think women know that when they're sharing their stories, they're contributing to what that solution is. And I'm hoping that once we get this critical mass, people will really start believing women, and we can create change in that way.
Do you think that America is finally having an open discussion on rape?
I think we have. I mean, up to the highest level, right? Like when in our presidential debates, when that issue of sexual violence was raised at our presidential debates, right? And there was a lot of conversation about what's okay and what isn't, as far as what language we use to speak about women, particularly men, what language men are going to use, and whether it's okay or it's not okay. Will it be tolerated? To some degree, it has been tolerated, and I would really like to see that change.
I've seen over the last probably 7 years, as I've been talking about my story, I've seen the reactions from people change to, before it was like, well, I never told anyone about this before, but, me too, I'm, in the same boat. I was raped at, Whereas now, I'm seeing young girls talk about it on Facebook, and while it's horrible that there are so many stories to share, it's really wonderful that women are feeling empowered to share those stories.
When we return, a university's devotion to defy rape culture on college campuses. Nearly 1 in 4 women experience sexual violence while in college, according to a recent study of students at 9 schools around the nation by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Sadly, the majority of these cases go unreported.
Based on some of the studies, will show that between 20 to 25% of sexual assault cases are reported, and so that's 75 to 80% of cases are not reported to authorities.
The prevalence of sexual violence on college campuses across the nation leads to one question: what will it take to convince our country that this is a serious problem?
Who do we support? Survivors! What do we want? End rape culture! What do we want? End rape culture!
That's why last summer, Halimat, along with a group of students and faculty, blasted the toxic rape culture at the University of St. Catharines, a campus where 97% of the students are women.
Current students, I think some past students who recently graduated saying yeah, I was sexually assaulted when I was at St. Kate's, and the way the administration handled it was not okay. I felt like they pushed me off the campus, and that was the general vibe that a lot of us saw and we felt. And so these conversations started happening. We wanted to let them know that we're serious and we expect you to be serious too. And so we made a few demands: cut off ties with Heartland Circle, and they did. We asked them to create a task force addressing the rape culture at the St. Kate's campus, which I am on right now, and they did. So our demands were met, but their initial protest was just to let them know that we are serious. We are watching, we're vigilant, and we have enough people who are willing to organize around it. So you can't give us lip service on this. This is something you actually have to follow through on.
What was the community's reaction to the protests?
I think people weren't upset. I think some people were a little bit confused. We're oh, I didn't know this happened at St. Kate's. I didn't know this is like what was going on. But there's a very little animosity.
Were any of the reactions, why isn't all girls university
Yes, a lot
protesting rape culture?
Yes, a man came up to us when we were protesting. He said, was there a rape on campus? Like, what's going on? I'm like, no. There's like, well, I don't know. We didn't know. Like, no, this is not what this is about. It's about the culture. It's about how we respond to like survivors. And so I think people are surprised, like, oh yeah, all women's university, you should be fine. I think even administration here on campus, that's their response. Like, oh, all women's university, we're fine, right? Like, it doesn't happen on this campus. I think the conversation was like, well, if it doesn't happen here and the perpetrators aren't here, we're good. But you have a women's university, which means you have a very vulnerable population to sexual assault, right? Like, you don't lock the gates on us. We leave. And we leave and we get sexually assaulted. And we come back here. And we should be safe when we come back here. We should have an administration that is willing to help us out when we come back here.
Ladies united! Who do we support? Survivors! Who do we support? Survivors! Who do we support?
The protests were sparked by a reaction to survivor Sarah Super. Her attacker's family owns a local event organizer and had longtime ties with the University of St. Catherine's. In 2012, Sarah's boyfriend at the time broke into her apartment and raped her. He is now serving 12 years in prison.
How did that change your life?
Well, it's so complex because my initial feeling, my initial reaction is it changed my life completely. And yet at the same time, I kind of long for that person and know that, of course, I'm not a totally different person, that everything I was and the person I was before I was raped, I'm bringing all of those things and all of that knowledge and experience to who I am today. But it has changed the way I view the world. And I think it's really opened my eyes to something horrific that happens very often.
Sarah is telling her story to empower other victims of sexual violence to break their silence and hold perpetrators accountable.
6 weeks after I was raped, I called the Star Tribune to tell my story. And by doing so and having that story run, many people from Minnesota, many survivors wrote to me and shared with me their stories, or that they were a survivor, oftentimes saying, you're the first person I'm telling this to, or I've never talked about this before. And so at that moment, I think there was so much that started kind of stewing in my mind, like, what would happen? What would happen if people who knew who survivors were? And I think a lot of this was watching my own experience play out, that I could tell my story, and that the people in my life who've never been sexually assaulted actually started to care about the issue of sexual violence because they cared about me.
Now, almost a year after the protests, Halima has joined St. Catherine's Title IX task force to evaluate current policies surrounding sexual assault on campus, as well as policies of forward thinking.
We're kind of building a framework right now, so we just want to know what are other schools doing and what are we not doing. So one of the questions that I asked is, do we have a nurse on campus in our health and wellness center who is qualified to do rape kits? The answer is no, we do not. We're talking about the financing of like a rape kit should be covered. I mean, Minnesota is one of those states where your rape kit you should not be paying out of pocket for your rape kit. It should be paid from your insurance or from the government. Like, someone else should be taking that bill. And so how does that work with the university system? We're also asking questions such as, what about like assignments? You have to recover from a sexual assault. If I recover from a car accident, I get an extension of my paper. If I need to recover from assault, would I get an extension of my paper? So these are questions that we're asking, and unfortunately these questions are now being raised to administration, that now we're asking, like, what would a survivor do when she came back to campus? How would she be treated, and what are the things that she would need?
As a senior, Halima hopes she has laid out a solid foundation for the current and future students of the university to carry on policies she's helped create to protect victims of sexual assault and dissolve rape culture.
Rape culture isn't just like an act, like, so people, when we think about rape, we think about like, this happened and then that's the end of it, right? But the culture encompasses like, how do your fellow students respond when they find out that like a rape happened on your campus? How do faculty and staff respond to you? How does the administration treat you? Is there a culture of acceptance?
Up next on Our Issues Twin Cities, empowering victims of sexual violence to break the silence. In 2014, survivors took to Twitter to explain what rape culture is. The movement prompted millions of survivors and supporters to share their stories. Tweeting rape culture is when you were asked if you were drinking. It's when people say she asked for it. It's when you come forward and you are asked what you are wearing. 3 years later, and it's still an issue.
How do we decrease the frequency of rape in America if the culture itself is reinforcing the concept that it's not so bad?
Well, that's in fact where we have to start then, with primary prevention. And there are many programs about how do we change that culture and change those social norms. Some of the leaders in prevention would say things like, just because it's the way that it is, that it's always been, is not to say that it's the way it should be, right? And so sometimes when we hear things like, boys will be boys, right? That was from how long ago did we say? There's a growing intolerance for that, and to say, no, this is not okay, and how can we change the cultural norm where that is the case?
Through her work, Sarah is changing the cultural norm.
We are building a memorial for survivors of sexual violence in the Twin Cities.
It will be the very first memorial in the country dedicated to rape survivors.
The first thing we need to do is bring attention to the issue and put faces and names to the issue and give people space for dialogue. So the actual memorial itself isn't just something to look at, but rather it's meant to be a place where people can sit in a circle and have conversation and talk about experiences and tell the truths that have gone untold for so long.
Today, Sarah holds truth-telling events called Break the Silence, inviting people to come forward and identify themselves as sexual survivors.
Through your work, how are you changing the notion of rape culture?
I think one of the things that's unique about Break the Silence is that we're moving this movement forward through a trauma-informed lens. And one of the key pieces that we're bringing is really that aspect of choice, that in a traumatic experience itself, a victim has no choices. And in the aftermath of trauma, you're not going to heal with bubble baths and kale salads, right? That you're actually going to heal with what was missing in the traumatic experience. And that sense of empowerment, that sense of choice is going to be essential for a survivor to heal. So one of the things that we're doing is teaching people how to offer trauma-sensitive choices, and even thinking about how to offer consent in a trauma-sensitive way. So I think that's been a unique part of challenging rape culture, that there's so many survivors surround us. Most often we don't know who they are. So we could just start to live our lives a lot differently in the context of offering people choices.
Listening to women and hearing their stories just helps women feel validated and human.
How has this experience shaped you to become the woman you are today?
It was like my first real exposure to oppression for the first time. It just made me feel like really powerless, and very much so as an object, as we hear a lot of people say, right? But following that, after I've started sharing my own story and being able to reclaim that narrative has been really, really powerful.
For now, Joy will continue to travel and spread her message through Fair Anita in some of the most impoverished communities around the world.
What has this jewelry given back to the women that are behind this craftsmanship?
There's a woman in one of our groups in India, and she talks a lot about how her whole life she's been labeled as this woman in poverty, right? Like a street rat in the lowest caste. A lot of different words around that. But she talks about that journey of being known from a poor person to now being known as a fair trade artisan, and what an incredible journey that is. And I think about that for myself too, having experienced rape and thinking a lot about myself as a victim, and going from that to feeling capable as an entrepreneur.
Sexual violence continues to be a serious issue in our country. Today, 1 in 6 women are victims of rape or attempted rape at some point in their lives.
I think rape culture hasn't taken down the importance of the word rape. I think it's trying to understand that rape is not just a single event. Survivors can be re-victimized at all turns. Like, as a survivor myself, scrolling through my Facebook feed can be very traumatizing, especially when the U of M thing happened with Brock Turner. And the way that we are willing to cape for rapists, the way that we're willing to stand up and find the humanity in rapists, but not in survivors. So I think that, in fact, we need to work a little bit harder to give humanity back to survivors.
How do we continue to empower women?
I think about that a lot. As I'm traveling and meeting with women, and you just see like the enormity of some of these issues, right? Things that women are facing every day, and you know, lots of different countries, and what can we do to really empower those women to live their best lives and to change their communities. And ultimately, I think practicing empathy is one of the biggest things that we can do. And I think the most important way to do that is just by listening.
Survivor voices are so powerful, and in part it's because we're just speaking from our own human experience, and that takes so much courage. I think that the most effective movements in history have been led by the people who've been marginalized and oppressed. And so by having some survivors speak out, it's creating a community that didn't exist before.
Sarah holds a few Break the Silence events throughout the year at disclosed locations to protect survivors. For more information, please visit sarahsuper.com. Thank you for joining me this week on Our Issues Twin Cities. I'm Rana Kamal. See you next time.